Well, James, there's another attempt today to bring civilians out of that steel plant in Mariupol. No word yet as to whether or not it's managed to get far enough into Mariupol to pull those people out, but no surprise about that at all, because we know from the last convoy that managed to make it to Zaporizhia, the nearby city, on Tuesday, that it took them days to successfully negotiate getting those people out and getting them through the maze of Russian checkpoints and bringing them to safety. So we'll see whether or not they're having any luck bringing those civilians out in the coming days. I think would be surprised to hear anything about that today. Now, it's worth pointing out that what we're talking about here is an evacuation deal that has been coordinated by the United Nations and the Red Cross with the Russian forces to evacuate civilians, but not to evacuate any of those Ukrainian soldiers there. So there is a growing concern as to their fate. Interestingly as well, another bit of news that we're getting out of Mariupol today is that, according at least to the Ukrainian government, Russian troops in the city, in the 90% of the city that they already control, have begun cleaning the streets, removing dead bodies from the streets, it has to be said, removing unexploded ordnance as well. This possibly for some kind of military parade next Monday, that is the 9th of May, Victory Day in Russia, and likely to be a really key day in this war. 18 missile strikes, we understand, fired from the Caspian Sea, hitting a range of civilian infrastructure across, as you said, central and western Ukraine. That includes Lviv, a city that has been largely shielded during this conflict. It hit water infrastructure there, electricity infrastructure as well, and the railway lines. Now, on the railway lines, Russia has actually confirmed that it did target 6 railway stations in the country. Now, presumably that is to try and slow the advance of Western weaponry that's been making its way from Western Ukraine to those front lines in the east. Now, in terms of casualties, interestingly, it doesn't seem that this attack was particularly focused on killing civilians. The focus rather was on disrupting civilian infrastructure like the railways, like the water supply. But from what we understand now, there hasn't been a death toll, but a number of people were injured.
Okay, and concerns as well today about drills, military drills across the border in Belarus.
Yeah, that's right, James. Now, we're seeing images of those military drills starting to come in right up near the Ukrainian border. Now, Belarus, obviously a key ally of Vladimir Putin in his war on Ukraine, and there has been some speculation, I mean, it's certainly no confirmation, but speculation that next Monday, Victory Day that I already mentioned, that we may see Belarusian forces joining this war in Ukraine alongside Russia. Now, the Russian government was asked about that today in the Kremlin. They denied that. They said there's no intention for this war to continue in that way. But clearly Ukraine is concerned about that. They're also concerned about another front in this war that's right on the other side of the country in Moldova, that breakaway region of Transnistria where there are 1,500 Russian troops stationed. There are fears as well that there could be a further incursion into Ukraine from the south. None of that happening for the moment, but certainly all eyes on Monday and that Victory Day. Our best understanding, Annette, is that the convoy going into Mariupol today has yet to reach those civilians who remain trapped under the steelworks there. As you said, some 100 people pulled out yesterday. About 900 of those remain trapped there. As many of them as possible will, of course, be hoping to get out today. But for the United Nations and the Red Cross that is coordinating this evacuation, it is obviously an extremely delicate process. They're coordinating with those Ukrainian fighters also trapped underground, but also with the Russian forces that have been bombarding the city extremely intensely for several weeks now. Now, important to point out that this evacuation today, whether it is successful or not, will only be able to bring out Ukrainian civilians. There's no talk so far that members of the Ukrainian armed forces who are holed up at that steelwork site will be able to get out today. No such deal for them has been reached at all. There is, though, the possibility today that some Ukrainian civilians elsewhere in Mariupol, not just at that steelwork site, that network of underground bunkers where the fighting has been concentrated, will be able to get out. We have been hearing that 2 other evacuation points have been set up, and that if civilians elsewhere in Mariupol are able to get themselves to those points, they will eventually be brought out with this humanitarian convoy. None of this, though, is confirmed at this point. There have been several attempted evacuations like this in the past. We've seen Russian forces bombard the road that those humanitarian convoys were supposed to travel on. So it may be very difficult for civilians to reach that point. But indeed, of course, everybody's hoping that as many civilians as possible can get out this afternoon. Quite a different story here where I am in the north of the Ukrainian capital compared to what you were just hearing from Luke Shrego reporting on what's been going on in the east near Mariupol. Here, obviously, the situation far calmer, but what civilians are focusing on is trying to get life a little bit back to normal here. You mentioned those demining operations. We've been filming demining operations this morning here. The experts are trying to ensure that roads are safe for people to travel on, bridges as well. But what I want to talk to you about actually is the village that I'm in right now. It's called Demyidev, and we're here because we're looking at why it is that the Ukrainians were able to effectively defeat the Russians in this part of Ukraine, defying all expectations at the very start of the war. Now, obviously, there are lots of different reasons why the Ukrainians were unexpectedly successful, but one of them is the tactical destruction of Ukraine's own infrastructure. So right from the very beginning of the war, Ukrainian soldiers would blow up their own bridges, in some cases blow up their own or target their own airports and make them unoperable. And what they did here in Demyidev, in this village that I am just about 50 minutes north of Kiev itself, is they deliberately flooded a key lake here. This is a dam that links the north of the country to Kiev itself, and by opening the dam here and flooding this district, it meant that Russian tanks couldn't advance here behind me at all. They were stuck, and that's part of the reason we've been hearing why it is that Russian forces were defeated here. But obviously, it's several months on from that now, and the Ukrainians living here in this village are still suffering with the repercussions of that, James. We were just talking to a pensioner, a woman in her 80s. Her entire courtyard in the front of her house is flooded. She has to wear Wellington boots to walk around. She says she doesn't really know what happened here, but that she's still suffering every day, and that they urgently need more humanitarian support in this part of Ukraine, although obviously not as gravely as those do in the east.